Episode 3. October 15th, 2007. Monday, 10:45 a.m. Los Angeles, USA. Simultaneous with Rajesh Bhargava's leaving the Queen Victoria Hospital. Jennifer was in the process of making her way from the medical school back to the main building of the UCLA Medical Center, and felt amazed at what she'd been able to accomplish despite her emotional fog. From the moment she terminated the conversation with the Queen Victoria Hospital case manager a little over an hour ago, she dealt with a new preceptor, dashed home, called back to India to give her passport number, made way to the med school, got the blessing of the dean for a week off, arranged a replacement for her gain employment blood bank job, and was now hoping to solve her emotional fears, economic concerns, and the problem of malaria prophylaxis. Although she'd taken out almost $400 she had in savings, she was worried it might be not enough even with her credit card and Foreign Medical Solutions of Chicago paying her major expenses. Jennifer had certainly never been to India, much less on a mission dealing with the dead body. The possibility she could use a significant amount of cash was hardly far-fetched. Especially of cremation or embalming was not something that could be charged. Being as busy as she'd been over the hour plus had the secondary benefit of keeping her from obsessing about the reality of her grandmother's passing. Even the weather helped, since it was as glorious as the dawn had predicted. She could still see the mountains in the distance, although not with quite the same startling clarity. But now that she was almost finished with her errands, reality began to reassert itself. Jennifer was going to miss Maria terribly. She was the person with whom Jennifer was the closest, and had been since Jennifer was 3 years old. Besides her 2 brothers, neither of whom she spoke with for months on end, her only relatives that she knew were in Colombia, and that she'd met them only once back when her grandmother had taken her for that expressed purpose. Relatives on her grandmother's side were a complete mystery. As far as Jennifer was concerned, her father Juan didn't count. Just as Jennifer had passed through the revolving entrance of the main red brick hospital building, her cell phone sounded. Checking the screen, she could see it was India calling back. She answered the phone and in the process stepped back outside into the sunlight. "I have good news," Kashmira said. "I have been able to make all the arrangements. Do you have a pencil and paper?" "I do," Jennifer responded, getting a small, stiff-backed notebook from her shoulder bag and tucking her phone into the crook of her neck. She was able to write down the flight information. When she learned she'd be leaving that afternoon but not arriving until almost the wee hours of Wednesday, she was appalled. "I had no idea it would take so long." "It's a long flight," Kashmira admitted, "but we are halfway around the world. Now when you land here in New Delhi and reach passport control, go to the diplomatic corps line. Your visa will be waiting there. Then, once you have the baggage and come out of customs, there will be a representative from the Amal Palace Hotel holding a sign. He will handle your luggage and get you to your driver." "Sounds simple enough," Jennifer said, while she was trying to figure out from her departure times and the arrival times just how many hours she would be in the air. She quickly realized she couldn't do it without knowing all the time zones. In addition, she found herself confused by having to cross the international date line. "Wednesday morning we will arrange a car to pick you up from the hotel at 8. Will that be all right with you?" "I guess," Jennifer said, wondering how human she would be feeling after being on the plane for 9 hours and having no idea how much sleep she would be able to get. "We look forward to meeting you." "Thank you. Now I'd like to ask you once again, if you have made up your mind between cremation and embalming." A wave of irritation washed over Jennifer just when she was beginning to like the case manager. Didn't she have any intuition? Jennifer wondered with amazement. Now, why would I change the way I thought just a couple of hours ago? She questioned irritably. The administrator made it very clear to me they believe it would be best for everyone, even best for your grandmother's body, if we got on with it. Well, I'm sorry my feelings have not changed, especially since I've been so busy that I haven't had the time to think about anything. Furthermore, I don't want to feel like you are pushing me. I'm coming as soon as I can. We certainly are not pushing you. We are just recommending what is best for everyone. I hope you people understand, because if I get there and my grandmother's body has been violated without my consent, I'm going to be a big stink. I'm serious about this because I can't believe your laws are that much different than ours in this kind of situation. The body belongs to me as the responsible next of kin. We certainly would not do anything without your expressed approval. Good, Jennifer said, recovering to a degree, yet surprised about the vehemence of her response. It wasn't lost on her that she was probably experiencing a significant amount of transference with her emotions, blaming the hospital and even Maria. Not only was she sad about her grandmother, she was also mad. It hardly seemed fair that Maria had not confided in her about running off to India, having major surgery, and then getting herself killed. After terminating the call, Jennifer stood where she was, recognizing it was probably going to take her some time and effort to sort out her psychological issues. But when she realized what time it was and that she had to catch a flight whose departure was not many hours away, with that in mind, she hustled back through the revolving door and headed for the emergency department. As per usual, the emergency room was bedlam. Jennifer was looking for Dr. Neil McColgan. Jennifer had met him during his first year, when he was still a resident. As a character unknown to the East Coast, he was entirely unique to her, and she found him intriguing. Neil was a stereotypical Southern California surfer dude sans blonde hair, which in his case was a nondescript brown. What Jennifer found so distinctive was his openly friendly, laid-back attitude that was in total contrast to his being a closet intellectual and a compulsive studier with a near photographic memory. When she had first met him, she truly couldn't believe he had been attracted to a tense, highly demanding medical specialty like emergency medicine. Although Jennifer was well aware she didn't share his social graces, she did share his general interest in knowledge for knowledge's sake and his study habits, and found him a fertile source of all sorts of information. Over a period of a year, Neil became the first man with whom she felt she could truly converse, and not just only about medicine. As a consequence, they became best friends. Actually, Neil had become her first real boyfriend. She thought she had had boyfriends before, but after meeting Neil, she realized that was not exactly true. Neil had been the first person to whom Jennifer had been willing to confide her most private secrets. "Excuse me," Jennifer called out to one of the harried nurses at the chaotic central station. The nurse had just shouted something to a colleague who was leaning out a doorway several rooms down the main corridor. "Can you tell me where Dr. McColgan is?" "I haven't the faintest," the man said. For some reason, he had two, not one, stethoscopes draped around his neck. "Did you try his office?" Taking that suggestion, Jennifer hurried over to the triage area, where the office was located. Glancing in, she felt lucky. He was sitting at his desk with his back to her, dressed in a starched white coat over green scrubs. Jennifer plopped herself down in the chair, squeezed between the desk and the wall. Startled, he looked up momentarily. "Busy?" Jennifer managed, with a catch in her voice. The question only elicited a scoffing chuckle from the man, whose attention had returned to the massive ER schedule for the month of November that he was poring over. Neil had pleasant features, intelligent eyes, and a slight dust of premature grey along his temples. He also had the broad shoulders and exceptionally narrow waist of a surfer. On this day he wore white leather, wood-soled clogs. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" she questioned. As she spoke, she had to choke back tears. "If you can make it quick," he said, but with a smile. "I have to have the schedule ready for the printer in 1 hour." He looked up again. Only then he became aware that she was struggling with her emotions. "What's wrong?" he said with sudden concern, put down his pen and leaned toward her. "I had awful news this morning." "I'm so sorry," he said, reaching out and gripping her arm. He didn't ask what the news was about. He knew her well enough to know that she would tell him if she was inclined, but wouldn't tell him if she wasn't, despite any amount of cajoling on his part. "Thank you. It was about my grandmother." Jennifer pulled her arm free and reached across Neil's desk to grab a tissue. "I remember. Maria, right? She died just a few hours ago. It was even announced, believe it or not, on CNN. Oh no, gosh, I'm truly sorry. I know what she meant to you. What happened?" "I'm told a heart attack, which definitely surprises me." "I can't understand why. Didn't the medical department here recently gave her a remarkably clean bill of health?" "They absolutely did. They even gave her a stress test." "Are you going to head home, or is that a problem? I mean, didn't you start your new surgery rotation today?" "No and yes," Jennifer said cryptically. "The situation is a bit more complicated." She then went on to tell Neil the whole story about India, about being needled, concerning cremation or embalming, about getting the dean to grant a week's leave, about a medical service company paying her expenses, about leaving in just a few hours. "Wow," Neil said. "You've had quite a morning. I'm sorry you're going to India for such a sad reason. As I told you last May when I came back, it's a fascinating country, full of unbelievable contrasts. But I guess this won't be a pleasure trip." Neil had been to India 5 years before to speak at a medical conference in New Delhi. "I can't imagine anything about this trip being pleasurable. Which brings me to the issue of malaria. What do you think I should do?" "Ouch," Neil said, wincing. "I'm sorry to say you should have started something a week ago." "Well, there is no way I could have anticipated this. I'm okay on everything else, even typhoid, from the scare last year with my patient in internal medicine." Neil grabbed a prescription pad from his drawer and rapidly wrote one out. He handed it to Jennifer, who looked it over. "Doxycycline," Jennifer read out loud. "It's not the number one choice, but the coverage starts immediately. The best part is you probably don't need it." Jennifer nodded and put the script into her shoulder bag. "Why did your grandmother go to India for her surgery?" "Purely cost, I assume. She didn't have health insurance, and I'm sure my bastard of a father encouraged it big time. I've read about medical tourism to India and never known someone who actually did it. I wasn't even aware of it." "Where are they putting you up?" "A hotel called the Amal Palace." "Wow," Neil said. "That's supposed to be a 5-star. He chuckled and then added, "Better be careful. He must be trying to buy you off." "Of course, I'm kidding. They don't need to buy you off. One of the negatives about medical tourism is that there is no recourse. There is no such thing as malpractice. Even if they screw up big time, like taking out the wrong eye or killing someone by mistake or incompetence, There's not a thing you can do. It's my guess they have negotiated some kind of a deal with the Amal Palace. It's just where they put people up. I mean, it's not like I'm getting a special deal. Apparently they pay airfare and hotel for one relative. That's why I'm getting the trip. My father claimed he couldn't go. Well, I hope something positive comes out of this journey, Neil said. He gave Jennifer's wrist one last squeeze. And keep me informed. Call me anytime, morning, noon or night. I'm so sorry about your grandmother. He picked up the pen as a signal he had to get back to work. I have a couple of requests, Jennifer said, maintaining the seat. Sure, what's on your mind? Would you consider coming with me? I think I need you. I mean, I'm going to be completely out of my element. Except for a trip to Colombia when I was 9, I've never been out of the country, much less to some exotic place like India. Since you were just there, you already have a visa. I can't tell you how much more comfortable I'd feel. I know it is asking a lot, but I feel so provincial. Even going to New Jersey used to make me anxious. I'm kidding, but I'm not a traveler by any stretch of the imagination. And I know one of the benefits of emergency room medicine is that you can take some time off, especially since you're covered for Clarence a couple of weeks ago and he owes you. With a sigh, Neil shook his head. The last thing he wanted to do was bring off to India. Even if he could get time off, in truth, it had been a part of his initial motivation for the specialty, and he'd specifically set up a 24 hours on, 24 hours off schedule for himself, so that when his work week started 7 a.m. Monday, it was essentially over 7 a.m. Thursday, unless he wanted overtime. The 4 remaining days of the week were available for his true love, surfing. At that moment, he was looking forward to a surfing meet over the weekend in San Diego. It was also true that his friend, colleague, and fellow surfer, Clarence Hodges, did owe him for a Hawaiian trip he had made. But all that didn't matter. Neil did not want to go to India because of a dead grandmother. If it had been Jennifer's mother who had passed away, maybe, but not her grandmother. I can't, Neil said, after a pause, as if he had given the idea true consideration. I'm sorry I can't go. Not now anyway. If we can wait a week, maybe. But it's not a good time. He spread his hands awkwardly in the air over the schedule he was working on, as if it was the problem. Jennifer was taken aback and disappointed. She had given a lot of thought about whether to ask him or not if she truly needed him. What had tipped the balance was the realistic question in her mind, whether she could actually handle the situation once she got to India. What was clear to her was that after the initial shock of learning about Maria's death, she had marshaled significant defenses, including all the rushing around, making the plans to make the trip, and what psychiatrists call blocking. So far things had worked reasonably well and she was functioning. But as close as her grandmother had been to her, she feared there would be a problem when the reality of the loss set in. She truly feared she could get to India and be an emotional train wreck. Jennifer stared daggers at Neil. Surprise and disappointment had instantly metamorphosed into anger. Jennifer had been so confident that if she asked him directly and admitted she needed him, which she felt she had done, he would surely acquiesce as a direct spin-off of the confidences they shared. The fact that he was turning her down so promptly and with a flimsy, ridiculous explanation, something she never would have done had the situation been reversed, could only mean that their relationship was not what she thought it was. In short, like men in general, in her mind, he was demonstrating he couldn't be counted on. Jennifer stood abruptly and without saying anything, walked out of the tiny office and back into the crowded emergency room. She could hear Neil call her name, but she didn't stop or respond. It tormented her that she knew now that it had been a mistake to confide in him. As for asking to borrow some cash, at this point, she wouldn't even consider it. October 16th, 2007, Tuesday, 6:30 a.m., New Delhi, India. Cal Morgan was a deep sleeper, and and needed a powerful alarm to wake up. What he employed was a clock radio with a CD player, and the CD he used was Marshall music. At 3/4 volume, the player was capable of vibrating the night table enough to move itself and other objects on its crowded surface. Even Petra in the neighboring master suite could hear it as if it were her room, so when it sounded, Cal made an effort to turn it off the moment he became adequately conscious. Even so, he occasionally fell back into deep sleep. But that was not going to happen this morning. He was much too keyed up about the previous night's activities for more sleep. He stared up at the high ceiling and thought about what had transpired the evening before. What bothered him was how close Veena's suicide attempt had come to bringing his whole project down. If he hadn't gone to check on her when he did, she would have died, and there was little doubt that her death would have resulted in an inquest, and an inquest would have been a disaster. It would have certainly closed Nurses International, and in the process, at the very least, slowed his progress towards his ultimate goal of becoming truly wealthy as the CEO of Superior Care Hospital Corporation. Cal hadn't been interested in healthcare initially, and he still wasn't interested in taking care of patients or nurses, for that matter. He just liked the money involved. $2 trillion per year in United States alone, and the field's record of sustained growth. Back when he was in high school, advertising had been his first career choice, and he had gone through UCLA and the Rhode Island School of Design in preparation, but briefly working in the field caused him to recognize its limitations, especially financially. Giving up on advertising, but not its principles of deception, he studied through Harvard Business School, where he was introduced to the mind-boggling money involved in healthcare. When he finished business school, he sought and got an entry-level job at Superior Care Hospital Corporation, which was one of the biggest players in the field. The company owned hospitals, feeder clinics, and healthcare plans in almost every state and major city in the United States. To best utilize his creative bend, Cal entered the company via the public relations department, where he saw the best opportunity to make a name for himself and thereby attract the attention of the company's officers. On his first day, he boasted he would lead the company in 10 years, and after 2 it appeared as if his prophecy might have merit. Along with the striking woman 5 years his senior and an inch taller than his 6 feet named Petra Danderdorf, who had been a part of PR when he joined, he found himself co-running the entire department. Thanks to a series of extremely successful ad campaigns the two had contrived that had nearly doubled the enrollment in several of company's healthcare plans. Some people had been surprised at his meteoric rise, but not Cal. He was accustomed to success from an early age, partly as a self-fulfilling prophecy of the confidence and competitiveness that was a part of his genetic makeup, which had been honed to an obsession by his equally competitive father. From early childhood, he wanted to win at everything, especially in competition with his 2 older brothers. From board games like Monopoly to school grades, from athletics to the presents he gave his father at Christmas, Cal insisted on being number 1 with kind of single-mindedness few could match. And success only reinforced his appetite for more success, to the extent that over the years he lost all the vestiges of the need of moral principles. In his mind, cheating, which he didn't refer to as such, as ignoring ethics, which he considered mere limitations for the faint of heart, was simply tools to advance one agenda. Superior Care Hospital Corporation officers were not aware of these details of Cal's background and personality, but they were very aware of his contributions to the company and were eager to reward him, especially the CEO, Raymond Hausman. By coincidence, this recognition had materialized more or less at the same time a mounting financial problem had been brought to the CEO's attention by his CFO, Clyde English. To their collective horror, accounting had determined that the company had lost in 2006 about $27 million from its bottom line because India's growing medical tourism industry had caused a disturbing number of American patients to shun superior care hospitals and wing off to Asian subcontinent for their surgeries. Linking the two issues, Raymond Hausman had invited Cal to a secret meeting in his office. He'd explained the medical tourism issue and the need for somehow turn it around. He had then offered Cal an unparalleled opportunity. He said Superior Care was looking to lavishly fund, through a secretive bank in Lugano, Switzerland, a company with the express purpose of seriously diminishing demand for patients to go to India for surgery. If he would agree to form it. Raymond was very clear that Superior Care Hospital Corporation wanted no ostensible connection with such a company and would strenuously deny there is a connection if asked, nor did they want to know how the company accomplished its goal. What Raymond didn't say, but what Cal definitely heard, was his termination at Superior Care Hospital Corporation was temporary, and that his success in the current venture would be cause for him to be welcomed back into the corporate fold with open arms at an extremely high level, essentially leapfrogging that corporate ladder, having no idea how he was going to engineer the new company's objective. Cal had accepted immediately with the proviso that Petra Dandidoff, then his co-director at Public Relations Department, would be included in the deal. At first, Hausman had balked, with no one to run Superior Care's PR, but after being reminded of the seriousness of medical tourism problem, he relented. 2 weeks later, Cal and Petra were back at Cal's hometown in Los Angeles, brainstorming their company to be's modus operandi. To help, each had hired a gifted friend. Cal had chosen Durrell Williams, an African-American whom he had befriended at UCLA and who had gone to specialize in computer security. And Petra had asked Santana Ramos, a PhD in psychology who had joined CNN after she had worked in private practice for half a dozen years. Most important, all four people were equally competitive, equally dismissive of ethics as a limiting weakness, and equally convinced that the current challenge of curtailing medical tourism for a Fortune 500 company was an opportunity of a lifetime. And each had vowed that they would do whatever it took to denigrate medical tourism. Quite expeditiously, the group had settled on a company plan of promoting patients' fares as the best way to lower demand. Until patients were subjected to propaganda to the contrary, everyone facing surgery had strong reflex reservations about going to India, another developing country, for an easy, understandable complex of reasons. The first was the concern of the country's general lack of cleanliness, raising the specter of wound infection and catching any number of the dreaded infectious diseases. Next, there was an obvious question of the skill of the surgeons and the other personnel, including nurses. In addition, there was the question of the quality of the hospitals and whether the necessary high-tech equipment was available. And finally, there was the question of whether the operations that were performed were generally successful. When the group looked into the propaganda the Indian Tourist Office was actively putting out, they discovered the office was clearly addressing those specific issues. Consequently, it was decided that Cal's new company would recreate ad campaigns to do the opposite and take advantage of people's fears. Everyone was certain this plan would be successful, since ad campaigns are always easier when the goal is the support of people's existing beliefs and prejudices. Unfortunately, no sooner had they settled on a strategy and begun trading ideas when they ran into a serious problem. They had realized that with India spending serious money and effort promoting their medical tourism, the Indian government would surely investigate if someone started doing the opposite, and an investigation of any sort would invariably cause significant problems if ad campaign claims could not be substantiated. Whatever had been quickly recognized was that real data were needed in involving private Indian hospitals, particularly in relation to outcomes, mortality, and complications, which included such statistics as infection rates. Yet the data were not available. The group had checked the internet, medical journals, and even Indian Health Ministry, which they soon discovered was dead set against releasing any such information, even refusing to admit it existed. In their own ads, they used no data whatsoever, merely claiming their outcomes were as good or as better than outcomes in the West. Stymied for a time, the group had suddenly realized they needed a fifth column inside the private Indian hospitals, participating in the highly profitable and growing medical tourism industry. What would have been best were accountants, but the efficacy of that idea seemed questionable at best. Instead, they had hit on the idea of using nurses, mainly because Santana knew something the others didn't, namely, that there existed a worldwide business in nurses. In the West, there was a shortage. In the East, particularly in the Philippines and India, there was a surplus, with many young nurses desperately wanting to emigrate to the United States for economic and cultural reasons, but facing significant and most insurmountable hurdles. After extensive research and much discussion, Cal et al. Had decided to go into the nurse business by founding a company called Nurses International. Their plan, as was accomplished, was to hire a dozen young and vulnerable, attractive, impressionable, newly graduated Indian nurses, pay them US nurses' wages, and bring them to the States on tourist visas, especially to California, for a month-long training session with the idea of turning them into a team of beholden and therefore easily manipulated spies. In California, they had been purposefully spoiled to maximize their manipulability and to take advantage of their wish to emigrate. At the same time, they had been trained in computers during the morning hours, particularly in regard to computer hacking techniques. In the afternoons, they had worked for a few hours as nurses in a superior care hospital to improve their American English, as well as acquaint them with American patient expectations, both of which it had been assumed would make it easier to hire them out of private Indian hospitals. Everything had gone miraculously according to plan. With teams of 2 nurses currently in 6 private Indian medical tourism hospitals. From housing, all had been required to live together in a mansion rented by Nurses International in the diplomatic area of New Delhi, to the initial chagrin of the nurses' families. Since the money the nurses were providing continued, however, family complaints vanished. After they had been working for a week, with all of them complaining they wanted to go back to California sooner than 6 months, they were required to remain in India. They have been instructed to begin extracting patient outcome data from the computers in their respective hospitals. The goal was to be able to begin to calculate infection rates, adverse outcome rates, and death rates for their future ad campaigns. To Cal and others' surprise, none of the nurses questioned this activity, and they were wonderfully successful. But then disaster had struck. Something had happened that no one had anticipated. The stats had turned out to be quite good, even strikingly excellent in several of the institutions. For a few days, Cal and Petra had been depressed and unsure of what to do. After all the money they had gone through to set up the elaborate spy system, they had begun to feel pressure for results. Raymond Hausman had even sent a secret representative a week earlier for an update on which they could expect something to happen. It seemed that the bottom line losses from medical tourism were continuing and ticking upward at an alarming rate. Cal had promised results would be forthcoming, since at the time of the envoy's visit, the outcome data were just beginning to flow in. But then, by tapping into the creativity and urge to win, Cal had come up with the second idea. If there were no bad statistics to be found for the basis of a negative ad campaign, why not create their own bad outcome? Hard luck stories with the help of their installed fifth column and feed the stories to the media in real time. With the unsuspecting help of an anesthesiologist and pathologist whom he had gotten to know in Charlotte, North Carolina, where he had worked at Superior Care's corporate office, Cal had settled on succinylcholine as his drug of choice to cause sudden death. The idea was to find patients who had a history of some sort of heart disease and who had succinylcholine as a part of their anesthesia, and inject them with an additional bolus of the muscle-paralyzing drug the evening following their operations. Cal had been assured the drug would be undetectable, and if it was detected, it would be assumed to be a form of patient's anesthesia. Best of all, there had been an immediate diagnosis of a fatal heart attack because of the cardiac history. As soon as Cal and Petra had polished the scheme, they presented it to Durrell and Santana. Although Durrell had taken the plan in stride, Santana had initially been hesitant. For her, stealing privileged data was one thing, but killing people was something else entirely. Since she had eventually given in, partly as a function of others' enthusiasm, partly because of everyone's commitment to success, including her own, partly because she had become convinced the scheme could not be discovered, and partly because there was going to be a limited number of victims, but mostly because she and others believed it would be the only way to salvage Nurses International, which, as it turned out, they were all counting on to be a key step in their careers and in obtaining the wealth they thought they deserved. The lesser reason for her change of heart was the intense study of Hinduism she had undertaken since she had arrived in the country. She found herself attracted intellectually to the concept of Punarjanma, or the Hindu belief in rebirth, meaning death was not the end, but merely the door to a new life, and a better one if the individual had adhered to the dharmic responsibilities. And finally, was the fact that she, along with the others, had vowed to do whatever it took to denigrate medical tourism. Once the new strategy had been accepted, the problem had been switched to the nurses' reactions and the question of their cooperation. Although the group had become so acculturated to American culture from their month in Los Angeles, so addicted to the money they were being paid for the benefit of their families, and were so looking forward to emigrating that they would most likely do whatever was asked of them, Cal, Petra, and Durrell were unsure. Santana, on the other hand, thought the nurses would have no problem, as they would be aided by their belief in Sansar, and particularly their belief in the importance of the organization and the group over the individual. Santana had then said the key was Veena in getting her to accept that it was her dharma to put to sleep an American patient. The idea was that if she was willing to do it as a de facto leader, the rest would unquestioningly follow suit. But Veena's cooperation was not given. While everyone agreed she was the most committed to the team and the most desirous of the emigrating, everyone had sensed a disconnect from her obvious keen intelligence, her inborn leadership ability, and her exceptional beauty, with her equally apparent poor self-image and lack of self-esteem. With such a thought in mind, Santana had gone to explain it was her professional opinion that Veena was burdened with serious psychological baggage of some sort, on top of strongly ingrained attachment to traditional Indian culture and religiosity. She also had suggested that learning the issue and offering to help her with it, whatever it was, might be key in obtaining Veena's cooperation. At that point, all had looked to Durrell. It was a common knowledge he was intimate with one of the nurses, Samira Patel. With disapproval by Petra and Santana, suddenly it became useful. Since Samira had been Vena's roommate as well as her best friend, they believed that if Vena had confided in anyone, it would have been Samira. Consequently, Durrell had been tasked to find out, which he did by convincing Samira that Nurses International needed to help Vena, and if they weren't able to do so out of ignorance of what was troubling her, the whole program, including helping the nurses to emigrate to the United States, would be in peril. Samira clearly believed every word, and despite having been sworn to secrecy, related Vena's painful family history. Armed with this information, Cal had approached Vena the previous afternoon with his offer to stop the abuse once and for all in return for her cooperation and leadership in regard to the new strategy. Vena had initially demurred, but then had changed her mind because of the promise of eliminating the threats to her sisters and mother. That had always been the biggest concern, standing in the way of her being able to emigrate. Cal Morgan sighed. Having rehashed his history, he realized the whole program of discouraging Americans to come to India for surgery had hardly been the walk in the park that he had initially assumed it would be. He shook his head and wondered what else was going to happen. Recognizing there was no way to anticipate the unexpected, he decided he needed an exit strategy. If worse came to worse, he needed to have a plan and resources to get out of India, at least for himself and the other 3 principals. He promised himself he'd bring it up that morning at the 8 o'clock meeting he'd scheduled. Rolling over, Cal looked at the face of his alarm clock. At 6:45 it was time to get up if he wanted to get in run before breakfast, and he could check on Vena to make sure she was up and planning to go to work. Although the doctors had cleaned her out the night before in the emergency department and thought she had absorbed a minimum of the Ambien because of the Cal's rapid efforts, he had to be certain. Her not showing up to work the very next day after Mrs. Hernandez's passing might attract some attention if there was any reason for someone to doubt the patient's death was natural. There was also the concern that Vena had been noticed at the hospital well after her shift had been over. With his jogging gear on, Cal headed in the direction of the guest wing. Rounding the last turn, he saw Vena's door was ajar, which he thought was encouraging. Once at the entrance, he knocked on the jamb and said hello, and leaned into the room all at the same time. Vena was sitting on the bed in a robe. Except for the slight reddish color of the whites of her eyes, she appeared normal and as gorgeous as ever. She wasn't alone. Santana was sitting on Samira's bed opposite Vena. "I'm glad to say the patient feels fine," Santana said. Santana was 5 years Cal's senior. Like Cal, she was dressed in a jogging outfit, but unlike Cal's, the outfit was stylish, with black shiny skin-tight pants and an equally tight black short-sleeved shirt made of synthetic fabric. Her hair, thick hair, was in a ponytail pinned up against the back of her head. "Terrific," Cal said, and meant it. "You are going to work, I presume?" he asked Vena. "Of course," Vena said. The voice reflected the mildly drugged feeling she was experiencing. "We've been talking about what happened last night," Santana said forthrightly. "Terrific," Cal repeated, but without the same enthusiasm. He couldn't help but feel reluctant discussing an issue he'd be uncomfortable talking about if he'd been the one involved. "She has assured me that she will not try it again." "That's nice," Cal responded, while thinking, "She damn well better not." She said she did it because she felt the gods would look kindly on her, sort of a life for a life. But now, because the gods saved her, she feels they wanted her to stay alive. In actuality, she believes the whole episode is her karma. Like hell they saved her, Cal thought, but didn't vocalize it. In its place, he said, "I couldn't be happier because we certainly need her." Cal studied Vena's face and wondered if she told Santana about the aggressive lovemaking episode or about the patient's disturbing agonal death throes, but her face appeared as inscrutably serene as usual. When Cal had spoken with the other principals the night before returning from the ER, he hadn't mentioned it either. Exactly why, he didn't know. His best guess was that he was embarrassed at having been so clearly taken advantage of by Veena's sexual aggression. Cal was accustomed to manipulating women, not vice versa. In regard to the kind of death the succinylcholine had apparent caused, which was far different from the peaceful paralysis that had been described to him, and he relayed it to the others. He was afraid any discussion might dampen general enthusiasm for the scheme. Cal had then excused himself and left. Despite being mildly concerned the women might take the opportunity to discuss him, but he didn't worry about it for long. Chanakyapuri was one of the very few areas of the city, other than the coastal ridge reserved forest, where running was enjoyable. Unfortunately, he was later than usual, and the traffic was already heavy and increasing with every passing minute. The dust and pollution were already almost of midday levels. In response, he exited the main road in favor of back streets. There, the air was better, but not far from the clogged main road, he ran into a large group of monkeys, which always scared him. Delhi monkeys were remarkably bold, at least from Cal's experience. It wasn't that he thought they would attack him en masse, but more because he worried they carried some exotic diseases that he might catch, especially if one bit him. That morning, as if sensing this unease, the animals chased after him, baring their yellow teeth, chattering and screeching as if they were crazed. Deciding that monkeys and pollution were more than enough reason to consider the jog that morning a bust, Cal abruptly switched directions, causing the monkeys to flee in panic. Like a horse intent on returning to the barn, Cal rapidly retraced his route back to the mansion. After being outside for less than half an hour, he was happy to be inside and particularly happy to step into his shower. While he lathered and shaved, and despite the disappointing jogging experience, he thought of the morning in a positive light. The short conversation with Santana had significantly relieved a concern about Veena. The suicide gesture had scared him, and until Santana's reassurance to the contrary, he'd been worried she might try it again. Now he was confident that wouldn't happen, and by involving the concept of karma, Veena apparently now thought of what she'd done to Mrs. Hernandez as a part of her fate, which boded well for the cooperation of the other nurses. After enjoying a breakfast of ham and eggs prepared by the bungalow chef, Cal headed towards the glass-enclosed conservatory at the back of the house. When they had moved into the house, the room had only chairs, but they had added a round table and used the space as their morning conference room. When Cal walked in, the other three were already seated and their lively conversation trailed off. Cal took his usual chair, facing directly out into the garden, with his back to the mansion's interior. The others had taken their usual chairs as well, suggesting all four to be creatures of habit. Santana was to Cal's right, Petra to his left, and Durrell directly across. Each of their postures reflected to a degree their personality. With quiet confidence, Durrell was slouching, cradling his chin in his hand, with his elbow on the arm of the chair. He was a powerful-appearing, heavily muscled man with a mahogany-colored skin and a dark pencil-like goatee and mustache. Petra was sitting bolt upright on the edge of her chair, as if in a grammar school, with the need to impress the teacher with the degree of her attention. She was a remarkably tall, handsome woman, high-colored and high-spirited. Santana was sitting back comfortably in her chair, with her hands folded in her lap, like the professional psychologist she was, waiting for the patient to begin speaking. She always appeared calm, with her emotions under strict control. Cal opened the meeting with Veena's suicide attempt to be certain everyone was well informed. He had Santana relate what she had learned that morning when talking with Veena, particularly about Veena insisting she would not try it again and why. Cal had admitted the episode had frightened him to the point he believed they needed a rapid exit strategy in place in case it was needed. If she had succeeded in killing herself, Cal continued, there would have been an investigation and an inquest, and any sort of investigation would have spelled big trouble for Nurses International. What do you mean by exit strategy? Petra questioned. Exactly what the phrase implies, Cal said. I'm not talking about something philosophical here. I'm talking literally, in the worst case scenario, such that we have to get out of India at a moment's notice, all the details should be pre-arranged. There shouldn't be any need for improvisation, or there might not be time. Petra and Santana nodded in agreement. Durrell merely raised his eyebrows questioningly. By land, sea, or air? He asked. I'm open to suggestions, Cal responded. He looked at each in turn, settling on Petra, who was a stickler for this kind of detail. By air would be too difficult, she said. Passport control at Gandhi International is too experienced. We'd have to pay off too many people, since we wouldn't know what time of the day it might end up being. If we were trying to secretly escape, it would have to be by land. I agree, Durrell said, elbows on the table, hands working at each other. I think we should plan to go northeast, with a car or SUV that we buy expressly for this purpose, and keep it gassed, packed with necessities, and ready to go. We could plan to cross the border into Nepal at a place we decide beforehand. That is the best. Although there really isn't a lot of choice. And finally, we should also put in the car an appropriate amount of cash for bribes. That's key. You mean buy a vehicle, prepare it, and then keep it out of sight? Cal asked. Exactly, Durrell responded. Start it up once in a while, put it into that big garage on the grounds and leave it there. Cal shrugged, looked at each woman in turn to sense their reactions. No one spoke. Cal turned back to Durrell. Can I put you in charge of arranging what you are suggesting? No problem, Durrell said. Now let's turn to the new strategy. Have you gotten any feedback at all? We most certainly have, Santana said. I heard back from the contact at CNN in only a couple of hours. They'd gone ahead and put the story on the air right after they got it, just as I had hoped. The response was terrific, and apparently much more than they had expected. With a flood of email from the word go, it was more than they had had on any story other than presidential primary politics for a week. They are dying for more. Sitting back, Cal let a slight smile spread across his face. What he was hearing was the first good news their collective efforts had generated for the whole project. When I woke up this morning, there was another message from Rosalind Beekman, my CNN contact. They said that all 3 network news shows expropriated the story to put together pieces on medical tourism in general. At the end of all 3 segments, the anchors left the question of safety of surgery in India very much in question. Terrific, Cal exclaimed, lightly punching the surface of the table with his fist several times for emphasis. It's music to my ears. It also brings up the question of when we should do it again. See, if CNN is, as Santana says, dying for more material, seems to me we shouldn't deny them. I agree, Durrell said. No question. If the fish are biting, it's time to fish. And I have to tell you guys, Samira is ready. It hurt her feelings that Veena had been selected to be the first over her. She says she has a patient with some sort of heart history having surgery this morning who would be perfect. Cal gave a quick chuckle. And I was worried we'd have trouble getting the nurses to cooperate. And here they are spontaneously volunteering. Turning from Durrell, Cal glanced at Petra and Santana in turn. What about you women? What are your thoughts about doing another? Last night I found Veena had OD'd. I never guessed I'd be asking whether we should do another tonight, but here I am." "Rosaline was emphatic about wanting more material," Santana said, looking across at Petra. "Since we know the news will be guaranteed to go right on the air, I'd have to vote yes." "What's the chance Samira will have an overreaction like Veena?" Petra said, staring back at Santana. "We don't want another suicide attempt." "Certainly not Samira," Jurel said. He was emphatic. "She might be Veena's age, a roommate, a best friend, but personality-wise, they're two completely different people. Which in some respects might be why they are tied, or at least used to be tied. Yesterday afternoon, before Veena left to do her thing, she reamed Samira out for sharing her family secrets." "Do you agree, Santana?" Petra asked. "I do," Santana said. "Samira is very competitive, but she is not a leader. More important, she is more self-centered and not so bottled up." "Then I'll agree to do it," Petra said. "What about the event being in the same hospital 2 days in a row?" Jurel asked. "Does anybody see that as a problem?" "That's a good question," Petra said. All eyes switched to Cal. He shrugged. "I don't think it matters. I was assured it would not be discoverable for a bunch of reasons. Second of all, the hospital authorities and their business backers are going to want to bury these deaths ASAP, excuse the pun, to avoid negative publicity as much as possible. India doesn't have a medical examiner system, and even if by some astronomically thin chance someone suspected foul play, and for another astronomically thin chance even thought of succinylcholine, the drug would be long gone and any residuals, or whatever they call it, would be explained away as something from the anesthesia they had had from the surgery." "Actually," Santana said, 2 deaths in 2 days is even a bigger story. I think it helps our cause." Nodding his head in agreement, Cal looked at both Petra and Jurel. Both nodded. "Wonderful," Cal said with a smile, placing both hands on the table. "It's wonderful to have unanimity. Let's make it happen." Then, looking at Jurel, he added, "Then you'll give Samira the good news when she returns from work." "It would be my pleasure," Jurel responded.